But with that, today's going to be an exciting session here today on Stone Ridge Confab. And with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip my screen and hopefully we're going to have both Mr. Marcus and Mr. Ron here to go through our conversation today. So, Ron and Marcus, nice to have you on Confab again. Ron, it's been a couple months maybe, and I know Marcus, you had one just recently, probably about, I don't know, it was 2025, right, that you did the last one, but welcome
Yep.
back.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Looking forward to it? A little nervous yet? Not a little worried yet? Or you know what we're talking about, right? Should be
Big
fun.
lead in.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. Well, maybe we'll just kind of frame this to kind of start. So today, obviously, what we wanted to do is just back up a little bit from all the AI conversation, all the technical conversations that we've been having, and really like talk about the front end of the sales process a little bit more because quite candidly, every good software selection process starts typically in the sales process. And what I've noticed is that there's a lot of conversation, and I think Marcus mentioned this as well because he recommended this session, but there's a lot of conversation regarding like RFPs and how to deal with a selection partner and the implementation process. But we really don't talk about like why does sales do what it does, right? Why does sales have all these different types of requirements and what are the most ideal scenarios and what are the worst scenarios, right, that we've experienced? Because quite candidly, I'm going to bring it up. I think we've got a century of experience on this call right now. Is that correct?
No, Ron thought your math was off on that.
Come on. Come
25
on.
years
This
for
is just
me.
a shot at me
Come
being the
on.
old
Come
guy.
on. Well, we all know you use the same barber, so we're good there,
Oh
right? So
my
that's the other
gosh.
one. So I'm done with
Yeah.
my burns. I'm waiting for all of them to come to me now. So you know how that works. So I guess
Uh,
with that, yeah, that's kind of what I want to talk about here today, and just get your guys' experience around this. I've been on the sales side for quite some time, but at the same point, I've got a little bit more experience. Thank you, Carly. I've got a little bit more experience on the delivery side as well, because that's really where I started my adventure before kind of moving over to the sales side or balancing both as well. So I guess kind of with that, Ron, do you want to just give a quick introduction of your background? Because one of the things that's really cool about Stone Ridge is the fact that it's not like you've just sold your entire existence. You owned a business that did this as
yeah.
well, so you understand it.
Yeah.
So do you want to give a little background for the audience?
Sure. Sure. No, I started out in the space back in the early 90s is when I first really kind of jumped into the technology side of the industry. And actually, um, let me back up. It was actually in the late 80s now that I think about it. So I am that old. But it is one of the things that I sought after college. I wanted to be in the technology space. Started out working really on hardware, almost exclusively selling NCR equipment, Altos equipment, using the old Unix and Xenix operating systems, and then migrated more over into the software side of the industry. And then in '91, started my own company, Norcomp Corporation, which was around for about 14 years. We originally were selling an old COBOL-based software solution. At the time, there was probably about 35,000 installations of that software around the U.S.
Everybody remembers
Um,
COBOL, right?
yeah, and we did quite well with the product, and then ultimately the product was acquired by, believe it or not, Great Plains, and then we started down the path of becoming a Great Plains partner, but we also started looking at some other software products, and ultimately happened upon a solution out of Denmark called Navision, which, believe it or not, Microsoft acquired about a year after they acquired Great Plains. So it was actually rather fortuitous for us because you couldn't go outside and throw a stick in Minnesota without hitting a Great Plains partner. Nobody knew much about Navision. And so we had a lot of expertise in that. And we had some success transitioning a lot of our clients and ultimately continued doing that for, like I said, until for about 14 years. And then ultimately sold the company and merged with another Microsoft partner where Scott and I were first introduced to each other back when he looked like he was a teenager. And No, and it's been a great experience. So I've been on both sides of it. I've been on the, I never did the actual functional delivery, but I was on the delivery side from an oversight position, being the owner and so forth. And it's been a great experience. I came to Stone Ridge Software about 10 years ago, and actually 9.5 years. It'll be 10 years this fall. So and it's been great. I've really enjoyed the working for this company, and it seems to fit that work-life balance. And I think just the overall experience working with them has been fantastic.
Right, and I'm waiting for the sales team members to come on here. I heard that you're the number one seller typically at Stone Ridge all the time as well, right? So,
Rumors,
right.
rumors,
Rumors
yeah,
say
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Rumors say this, right?
In my head, I am.
Yeah, right,
I don't
right.
know.
We're all
I
the
don't know if I'm
greatest in our
necessary,
head, right?
but in my mind, yes, yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. I love it. I'm waiting for Deb or Mr. Ruel to hop
yeah,
on here in
yeah.
the background
They
and
might argue,
voice
yeah,
their opinion, or even Dwayne
yeah,
for that
yeah.
matter, right? So.
We've got some good salespeople for sure.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think the
So,
cool thing here though is that experience. Like most of the sales team, Dave Ruel, for example, he was the implementation director at Stoners for a while. So
hmm
it's a really
hmm
unique perspective. And a couple comments that people made as things were going on here. Rob, Mr. Wagner said, as you were talking about the 90s, because remember I didn't enter until the 2000s, Ron, if not a little bit later. But the
yeah,
90s,
yeah.
that was Pearl Jam era, right? Is kind of what we were looking at there. And then the only other thing Cindy mentioned that you didn't have sound, Cindy. I'm glad everything's working. Fantastic. We've got sound back, so we should be good. And also, Carly told me to turn down the music volume, so I apologize to our audience. With that, though, Mr. Marcus, I know you've been on here a couple times. People know you as well. Same kind of story, though. Like you've got a lot of implementation background as well that you've kind of covered. Do you want to kind of just give some highlights so people don't feel that a seller is just somebody that's lived in sales their entire life? They actually have done implementations, right? And you've got that background as well.
Sure. I started in the mid '90s, so pre Y2K. Started with really that was a straight financial product, not Microsoft product. And then towards the end of that firm's life, we brought on Great Plains. So that was my first introduction to Great Plains at that point. And then Microsoft acquired Great Plains. So started really on more of that, again, the mid-market, similar to Ron in terms of products. Started doing Navision, after the Microsoft acquisition, so worked with that product, and then that's now morphed into Business Central. But prior to coming to Stone Ridge, my time was always split between software demos and implementation. So I've always had a foot sort of on both sides of the fence, if you will, from implementation and the sales perspective. But never been a seller directly. It's always been a pre-sales role, demonstration, scoping, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Yep.
And that's really interesting, right? Because it gives a different perspective from the technical side of it that we go through. Because usually, I mean, even to start the conversation, when you start to go through a software selection process, when you're dealing with a partner, and maybe we should back up a little bit, and Ron, maybe you can kind of clarify this for the audience. More specifically, Microsoft works through partners, right? Which is a little bit different than some of the
hmm
other models. What are those models, Ron, that you've kind of seen, and what's the advantage do you think from the Microsoft model with the partner network that we have?
Well, I think the advantage of doing the with Microsoft using, channel partners, it allows them to make sure that they've got experts in specific verticals. I mean, we can't be a jack of all trades, master of none. And some of those companies that actually do the sales directly, it's hard to have that expertise in a certain discipline. Manufacturing is different than construction, and construction is different than, nonprofit. So having those different partners out there, being able to really bring that expertise to the table, paired up with a strong, product, I think really allows them to be to really, provide a lot more resources and be able to broaden their opportunities with the customer base out there than you would if you're trying to do it all, under one roof.
Right. Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, the other advantage I see as well, Ron, is the fact that if you're unhappy with one partner, there's another partner that can help you with it. Or there's also the fact
Great
that,
point.
right,
Yeah.
if a partner as a smaller entity isn't liquid, or if something bad happens, you've got other partners, and technically even Microsoft has their own implementation services as well, at a certain level of customer, right? So
Right.
it's a good balance that's there. Ron, has that always been kind of like what you have experienced? Have you always been in a partner network as part of your career?
Yeah, actually, for the entire time of my career with Real World and Great Plains, it was all the same. They were going through partners like us, the channel out there. It's like I mentioned, you couldn't back in the early '90s go outside and throw a stick in Minnesota without seeing a Great Plains partner. They were everywhere. Which I mean, again, it speaks to the product. Obviously, I think when you've got that many people out there really actively selling the solution, they knew that there was something there. But no, that's been my experience. But I've also gone up against companies, that sell and support their own solutions. It's interesting. It feels like I've seen a lot of even some of the tier one companies kind of move to more of that model of partners, even though they still do sell direct. They'll sell the licenses and then bring a partner in that they've certified for that. Um, we actually sell the licenses and then we also do the deployment. Microsoft technically can sell licenses through their, the LARs, but at this point, they still allow us to continue to do the licensing as the product. And I think that makes sense too, because not all licenses, if you understand the licensing model, a lot of these companies, they really base the licensing on what the user roles are,
Yep.
and for somebody to really understand what those user roles look like, you have to be digging deeper into, what those process requirements are and what their security requirements and role requirements are to really identify that more effectively. So I think it gives us that opportunity to really, kind of vet that process a little bit more, make sure that they're getting the appropriate license and not spending more on something that they're not really going to be using.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And just really candidly, like I've had the experience like SAP Direct, right? And let's demystify it for people. SAP Direct does not necessarily mean SAP resources. It means that they have subcontracted potentially a partner company, but it's on their paper. So
That's
there's
correct.
right, there's different
Yeah.
strategies that everyone uses, but I will say insulating you in terms of having, like, think about it this way: when you have a partner that's doing the implementation day in and day out, the methodology related to it, the check-in processes that are related to it, it is a different animal than software development. And we've noticed that too as we've gone through our IP journey, right? And Eric Newell can talk even more to this, but like with
Hmm.
leverage for our ag product, maintaining software and creating software is way different than implementing software, right? So it's just something to note here for everyone that's out there, just to say, hey, that's kind of why these structures work really well from a partner network perspective. And I guess, Marcus, I got a question for you just off of that then. When we think about that, it creates some unique complexities for us, right? Because we have to maintain the infrastructure, we have to set up the demo environments, we have to know, for example, the vertical. And typically, we need to know it deeper for an industry, for example, than Microsoft needs to know for the platform. And what do I mean by that? Well, okay, let's take purchase orders just as a really simple example. No match, two-way match, three-way match. What some industries do no matches, a lot of industries would say, why are you even asking me the question of no matching? Because we always do material matching with receipt and invoice for three-way matching, for example. Does that create some interesting logistics, Marcus, then for you as you go through that?
Yeah, it does, and I think that's why us knowing industry is important. So I'd echo Ron's perspective. I think the key in some of this though is our relationship with or access to the developer. So us being able to communicate needs of specific industries, Microsoft listens to that. They hear that, hey, we need to add these features, we need to add this functionality, we need to make some adjustments for certain industries, and I think they listen to that. So I think the level of partner that someone is makes a difference too. So in that sense, yeah, we do have a voice back to Microsoft on that, and they do listen.
Right. And that's part of the Partner Advisory Council, like that Eric's a part of. That's part of what we call Inner Circle. That's part of being gold certified, right? I don't know if that's the same exact name that they use now. But like you said, those certifications, I always look at them as kind of like they're almost like the base to establish, like, is this partner really deeply embedded with Microsoft? And like at Stone Ridge, we do just all Microsoft products. We don't do NetSuite, Infor, SAP, any of the other products. We focus on Microsoft technologies, which is, you know,
Exclusively,
right?
yeah,
And it's I'm not saying every Microsoft technology is fantastic, because it's not, and we
yeah,
know that.
yeah,
But we do
yeah.
know that they work better together culturally when we go through a lot of our implementations and a lot of our interactions. Nolan had some really good points. I appreciate, Nolan, you kind of posting this, but doesn't the proliferation of GP partners before also allude to the needlessly over complex structure of how it gets rolled out? I feel like in the last 10 years, it's gotten significantly better with companies such as Stone Ridge taking a more front row seat. They want to. This is 100% why Stone Ridge and Leverage stand apart, and that's probably more towards when we were talking about the two. You have to understand the root systems and and become true system thinkers. Yeah, you're right, Nolan. Like there's just a different mentality with it, and yeah, I think partner-wise, we've just really started to focus more and more and hone in on in the sales process being much more candid with people to set those expectations. And maybe we can start there, Ron. Like when we think about like how customers engage, for example, with
Hmm.
Stone Ridge, like
Hmm.
what's the worst and what's the best? Like what and maybe not even Stone Ridge, like what's maybe I should back that up and say what's the best you've ever interacted with and what's the worst? And I can pretty much guarantee you it's not just you won $1 million or millions of dollars in an opportunity.
Yeah.
You can tell the difference between a customer that's ready to do this and who's not ready. So, can you give us some background maybe on that?
I would say, well, let's start with the best. I think the best, in my opinion, are the companies that come in with realistic expectations, number one. And I think transparency is critical, you know, back and forth. And what I mean by that is, you know, there's times where you get approached by a end user that's looking at it, or maybe a consulting group that's looking at it, and you start asking questions, and it's like going into a doctor. If you have to ask the questions to really get to the, you know, to really understand why they're there, what it is, what that they're, you know, what's the ailment. And so often, you know, you get some of these partners that, you know, and consultants, they don't want to share too much. It's like, okay, well, now I'm kind of feel like, you know, I'm dealing with these guardrails where I'm not really able to take a look over it and understand more effectively where the problem is. How can we be of real help to them with our solution? And so, um, the best ones are really the ones that are very transparent. They're not afraid to share with us, here's the mistakes, here's the problems, here's the challenges we're facing. And if I ask them, the other thing, and we've talked about this before, you know, is understanding what their budget is. I mean, they've got to go in with a realistic expectation of that as well. I mean, I can't, you know, if they come in, it's like if, you know, you've talked about this before, where you go in, it's like buying a car. You know, if I'm budgeting $30,000 for a car, then I should tell them that that's what I'm budgeting. Otherwise, they might walk me over and start showing me $70,000 and $80,000 cars. That's not in my budget, you know. So really being transparent really helps us, and I think that's one of the things that's really critical. We're going to be just as transparent. And I think the best partners that are out there, and there's a lot of good ones, but the ones that are out there that I think are the best are the ones that are really transparent with their clients and saying, listen, this is a good fit or that's not a good fit. And we'd love to be a partner for you, but I don't think in this particular case we would be. You might be better suited, you know, working with somebody that does verticals that's really, let's say it's point of sale, you know, somebody that's not an area that we do well. So let's let somebody else do that, you know, and being able to say that, I think is also important. So just being able to bring down those walls.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there's a something that underlies everything you said, Ron, which I think is the partnership. And I really believe that's one of the reasons why I came to Stone Ridge. Is Stone Ridge sees we see ourselves as a partner with our clients. So it's not a sales transaction. Yes, it's a sales team, but it's not a it's not a licensing sale. It's a really long-term relationship. And I think
It's not a
everything that
one
you,
and done.
Yep.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 Everything that you spoke to is really about that relationship. So we want to help. That's why budget's important. We want to know what your issues are. We want to make sure that we're finding the right solution that fits your organization, fits the problem. We don't want to oversell. We don't want to undersell. So I think that's really key, at least in terms of our approach to the sales cycle. The long-term relationship aspect of it.
Right.
Yeah, I think those are really valid points. I mean, the budget one is always the one I bring up because if you think about like we usually get some type of requirements, we usually get some conversation with people, but very often people don't want to share a budget, and I think that that's just a fatal mistake for a company. And the reason for that, not only just from Ron's perspective, but these software solutions, they're scalable based off of budget as well. Like a BC implementation can range between, I'm sure, 50,000, 25,000 on the super low end, like the rapid start, like you just use it the way it is, like QuickBooks, so to speak, and maybe even cheaper, all the way to I've had multi-million dollar implementations of Navision and Dynamics Nav. And so when you come to me and you say you want something, it's like, well, wait a second, like what are we talking here in terms of the work effort that you're willing to pay for to replace your business system? Because that's really what you're asking to replace. And I think once again, it's really common as well to mix and match solutions too. And I think that that's also another fatal mistake. What do I mean by that? You mix in small and medium business solutions, and you then mix in corporate or enterprise solutions. Just as an example, in our software stack, Business Central is considered small and medium business to mid-market, and then mid-market up is typically going to be considered finance and operations, or you'll hear it called finance and supply chain management. So we'll be at an opportunity where we'll have customers that are like, we want to check out F&O because we've heard it is the best thing ever. And then they've got Infor and NetSuite and these other products in there. And it's like, it doesn't even compare. It doesn't even, like, it's a whole tier different in terms of the depth of functionality, in terms of the configuration, in terms of the implementation process. And that,
Well, the team
right?
you need to support the product.
Right?
Right. Your internal infrastructure is going to be completely different.
Yeah, because they're looking at it and they're saying it's better, but quite candidly, like I love cars, Lamborghinis. You're not going to have a Lamborghini that has 100,000 miles on it typically. Like that's a really rare thing. You're lucky if some of the owners of these high-end cars go, for example, maybe 1,000 miles in a year. Like it's not something that they're using all the time. And that, like I said, that's kind of the anti of what we're trying to do. We're trying to build solutions that last with you pretty much permanently now. Like there's very little reason to move off of systems, right? So
Yeah.
I guess, kind of going off of that a little bit more, like I appreciate that, Ron. Like,
Well, here, let
Yeah.
me add one more thing too, Scott. I think
Yeah.
the other thing that that you have to look at when you ask, I told you what I think the best customers are. Though I think the customers are that are the biggest challenges. Not, with the communication back and forth between us. It's actually the communication that they have back and forth with their end users. So when I go into a project, one of the questions I always want to find out and understand is how much input has the other end users, the people that are actually in the trenches day to day, had on the direction of this. Because what I've found over the years is that one of the biggest challenges for a deployment of an ERP solution is going to be user adoption. If your users don't feel like they've been heard, and we're suddenly bringing something in and telling them this is how good it's going to taste, and here you're going to use this software, it's like it's going to be a fight from day one. So I always try to encourage the customer, please get as much input, document it, make sure that your end users feel like they have a voice. If you can do that, you're going to get them to go. I'll tell people too. To me, successful deployment is much about the psychology as it is technology. I mean, you've got to really understand your users, and you got to be making sure that they feel like they're being heard if you want this to be a win-win for your organization.
Yeah, yeah. Software implementation fail can be as much about everything outside of the actual application as it is about the application.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely. There's a lot of good software products out there, there really are, and it's like, but the success of that software is heavily predicated on the customer as well as the partner that they choose to go with. It's not the product. Most 9 times out of 10, it's not the software that's the problem. It's the unless it's 10, 12 years old and you're looking to do some new provide some new functionality. But point being is there's a lot of good products. It really just boils down to making sure you've got a partner that's listening, you've got an end user that's listening, and that they're collectively working together in concert. I think that makes all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been on implementations where we've not had a really good implementation to start because we didn't have as much of that interaction with the subject matter experts. And what does it do? It kind of snowballs. Like Navision turned into No Vision back in the day initially, but then we got the leadership team around that, and then we worked through the issues, and we were able to really revive that with the right leadership and the right perspective. Because this isn't easy. Like this is the hardest thing that a business typically goes through. They're reinventing their processes. They're trying to align to more standardized processes.
yeah,
They're trying to identify their special secret sauce that makes it a little bit different than what the business system wants to do, but that's what they do with their customers to interact with them. So
yeah.
once again,
I think it's
right.
I think it's analogous to a heart transplant
Yep.
for an organization. If yeah, a system change goes poorly, it can have dramatic effects on the organization.
So
Mm-hmm.
what are the typical, like when we think about customers that we interact with, like we've got there's all these parties involved. There's us, sometimes there's a selection consultant, sometimes there's not. Sometimes we're dealing with like groups of people, sometimes we're dealing with an individual. What is the common that we typically see then? And maybe Ron, you can field that. Like what do we usually see at that beginning process when we get engaged with an opportunity?
Really depends. I find probably the larger the company is, the more inclined they are to use a consulting group to help kind of build out that plan with that, RFP or that RFI that they're gonna, present and evaluate partners with.
So
Smaller companies,
totally
go
separate
ahead.
from us, and also then from Microsoft, and also from like I think you're saying a selection consultant. What is a selection consultant?
Oh, sorry. Well, yeah, there's consulting groups out there that actually provide those services. For a company that maybe is concerned that they're not going to capture all the necessary requirements for a full, redeployment or a migration into another larger type of software solution. They'll engage these partners, these consulting groups, to come in and assist them with that. And in most cases, those consulting groups do a really good job of capturing at a very high level what the requirements are, and diagramming out, the equipment, the software that they have. Understanding all those things are really critical, because it doesn't just come down to the application that you're going to be deploying. It's whether there's going to be any customizations, and if there's going to be integrations, and what applications you're going to need to integrate with, and what's the data migration going to look like, what are the environments that they're going to be needing. There's just so many different things that influence that, and they were able to capture a lot of that and be able to bring that to the table early on. So if they don't, and we have clients, then we will do those deeper dives for them and really start to do effectively understanding what their process requirements are, and talk about a lot of the things that the consultant groups do as well. So we can provide that, but some of the oftentimes the consultant groups will provide that information for us. So it's essentially gives us a couple of steps in on the process rather than starting from scratch. And so that's kind of what I've seen over the years.
Yeah, and so those are typically like we call them requests for information or requests for proposals, right? So like
Right.
these third-party software selection firms, you can look at them as more enabled around business process capture to then communicate those requirements then to a partner. And really all it is if you think about it, you sit down with Cindy in accounting and you go through every process that Cindy does and you
Hmm.
document why it's being done and what the outputs are, and usually those business consultants can map it to what is the functionality inside of a business system that would commonly address that. Three-way matching as a feature, purchase order management, requisitions, whatever it may be. So that's really what they're doing. And like you said, Ron, sometimes most of the bigger customers, I would say, like when we look at mid market or above, and when I say these terms, just think like up to 100 million and then 100 million on up is like mid market, and then billion on up is usually a higher tier. This is just it's generalization. So there's all these other factors that come into play, but it's really rare that I see a company that's 100 million or more come into a conversation about replacing a business system without requirements of some
Right.
sorts in
Right.
detail, and usually with the third party that's involved with it. And I
Yeah.
guess
And
that, yep, go ahead. Yep.
I was going to say, and most companies, truthfully, they don't document their processes. They don't have them well documented.
Right.
And that's one of the questions we'll always ask during discovery. Is there any documentation of the processes that you have today? Because that will allow us to kind of identify when we're doing our fit gap analysis, you know, with our software, what is it that they're doing that may or may not be part of the process or workflow within Business Central or finance and operations. Um, and it also helps us to really kind of understand what those paradigms are
Yep.
that they have in place, why those things are set up that way. Oftentimes, those processes are, you know, exist because there might be a limitation within their application. So we're able to identify there's an area that we're going to be able to improve dramatically and be able to demonstrate that to them. Because at the end of the day, we have to be able to show everybody the value of how, where is this going to actually save them money? Where is it going to increase those efficiencies? How is it going to allow them to do things better and help them to win?
Right. Yeah, and I guess just one more question to ask you, Ron. Like, so usually at this process, is it the selection firm that we're working with, or is it the customer that wants to buy the software? And in what situations have you been in where the selection firm was the front end the entire time? And what pain did that cause versus getting the customer engaged? Like, where's that balance in your mind?
Uh, we usually don't really get an opportunity to engage the client until we've actually responded to the RFP. And once we've been able to get, and oftentimes we do get an opportunity when we have an RFP to be able to engage the client for a day to do some additional discovery beyond the RFP. That's our first. Once they've gone and it's the partners have been down selected. And what I mean by that is that they reduced the number from, let's say, 7 partners that they've originally sent the RFPs out down to maybe 3 or 4. That's that down selection. Then we often get an opportunity to engage the partner more because now we're doing deeper dives. We need to be in front of them. They don't want to lose something in translation. So we do get that opportunity to do that. It's rare that we don't, we're kind of given the Heisman by the consulting group until, decisions are made because it's so difficult. And these, I think, consulting groups, they understand that as well. There's value in getting those partners in there on site, doing walkthroughs, meeting the users, understanding what those processes are, because they're not going to be able to capture everything.
Yep.
That I think would be, and those different nuances can have a big impact on how the product's going to be deployed.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit because I think, Marcus, it kind of starts with the pre-sales team, right? So you go through the opportunity will be identified by Ron or by Kevin or by somebody internally in our sales team. They identify the process, right? Is this going through a selection firm or not? But I think really eventually what we need to do is we need to answer either the request for information that the customer selection team sends, and when I say selection team, I also mean selection partners, and usually those requirements, like those are fun to do, aren't they? Because you'll get like, well, I'll let you say. Tell me about those and tell me about the fun that you have with that, Marcus.
Well, I think a requirements document is important. So you have to have that.
Yes.
But I think there's a balance between documenting the process to understand a certain set of functionality needs to be, or actually it should be different. I need a certain outcome, right? So like three-way matching, you said, okay, we need to do three-way matching. That would be a requirement. I think sometimes when the requirements get so detailed, it's really about replicating a process. And I think replicating a process is sort of alluded to what you talked about, Ron. Some of what we do because that's the way the old system had to work. So
Right.
yes, we need to do three-way matching, but the idea that I need to click here, 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 and populate this specific value, I would just encourage people looking at systems to sort of back away from that a little bit, right? Have some, um, just make sure you're open to some changes there. Doesn't mean we're not going to do three-way matching, but when we get, let's say, a demo script or requirements that lists, specific fields with specific values, if there's not really an underlying need for that, I would just encourage people to back up from that. So yes, you need requirements, absolutely, but not too detailed and not to replicate the exact process that you have today. And I think there's a balance in all of that.
Well, and I think the big advantage too is so oftentimes if you're trying to replicate that, we call that paving the cow path,
Yep.
because some of those processes are they're in place as I described earlier. It's something that they've introduced because of a limitation within their application.
Yep.
So to your point, Marcus, it is important if they can just take a look at this. We're going to get you to that endpoint, that same endpoint that you're looking for, that same outcome, but we might have a slightly different path that we believe is going to be a lot more effective. But we
Right.
need you to be open to that and looking at that. And then be able to also show them some of the subtle advantages that they'll get by virtue of that new, path forward. So I think it's a really valid point you bring up.
Yeah, and chat too, like Rob mentioned, you must free your mind from the past processes in order to grow exponentially better. And I agree. Like once
Yeah, well
again,
stated.
right? Like I think the important thing here is for the viewers is to understand that like if you're trying to redesign what you did before and that's what everything is based off of for your requirements, you're going to be disappointed because you're going to implement the same system you had before and that's the reason you're trying to move away from it. Whereas right now, when you're going through a system change, the best opportunity to align the business process is when you're going through that implementation process. So changing that mentality from I need this because it's the way I did it to I really may need this, but I got to qualify and quantify like where's the data being used? What's the output here? Like if it's three-way matching, it's three-way matching, right? Is that part of the implementation process or is that a requirement that is going to require us to go into tons of detail around to redesign when that is just waste, right, as you go through that process. So it's
Yep.
really cool to hear that. I mean, so, and just to understand this then, so we go from really, we have a selection partner typically involved, or we've got requirements. We get the requirements. Marcus, you look at those requirements, you respond back to them. What kind of happens after that then? Like what do we typically recommend as our next stage after that initial response that we give as part of that, which I think sometimes includes numbers and sometimes doesn't. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think a lot of times there'd be some sort of estimate of effort that would accompany that. Again, I would say hold that loosely. As we get further into the demo cycle, there could be adjustments, either more functionality or less functionality that's needed. I think speaking to Ron's point, if we're working directly with a selection firm and haven't really done discovery, there's assumptions that we're making. As we're putting those requirements together that we're assuming, again, based on our experience, you might need this. So we might include additional functionality that's in the system. So the estimate could potentially be too high. If we dig in and then realize, oh, actually you don't need that, we could scale it. We could scale an estimate back or add because we didn't see something in the requirements too.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. I'm kind of curious, Ron, how often, like, we'll come in like high, right? And how
Mhm.
often do we get the opportunity to have a discussion as to why we're high?
Oh, I would say that most of the time we actually get to explain ourselves,
Right, right.
So um, and the thing that we have to be again, it's being transparent. It's really trying to if I see somebody coming in with the same software product as us and their estimate's substantially lower, something's not right.
Yep.
Somebody's not being, you know, completely candid about things. Um, we've been and what I'll tell people is, well, your product is so much higher. You're charging more, or your hours is more. And what I'll respond back with is I'm the number of hours are what they are, and this is based on 13 years of experience, just as Stone Ridge. I mean, this is 13 years of collective. It's hundreds of years of experience when you look at our entire employee base and the knowledge that they bring to the table. And we built out this, implementation methodology based on that. And is what I'll tell clients. Again, this is going to sound a little salesy, but it's, we've never had a failed go live in 13 years. Never had a failed go live. Now, that doesn't mean that we haven't had projects that have gone over budget. Those
Oh,
things happen.
right.
We've also come in under budget. Okay, that does happen too. But those things I think you just have to be, mindful of. So when I see that low number or somebody comes in with some unrealistic number, I think I would lean towards somebody that's giving me a more conservative number because, and at least can support that. Um, there's a reason why Eric's book, Mastering the Deployment of D365 Software Implementations is, used and it's kind of the gold standard now, by a lot of partners. They're using that, incorporating that methodology into their own. So, you've just got to be practical about it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good viewpoint. I think, maybe just to cut through it all to the viewers, it is not uncommon or it's not unheard of, which is kind of sad in our industry, but it is a reality that a partner will either come in, and I don't mean a partner like a Microsoft partner per se, I mean a competitor, right? Some type of competitor, and we've seen it all across the board, and I've personally experienced this, where they will either come in cheaper or at the cheapest cost possible, and then they will change order you to death as you go through the implementation
Right.
process. I wish it wasn't common, but it's a way that partners, customers, competitors, whoever it is that's involved in that story, are able to get you to buy the software, and then as you're implementing, you're kind of stuck because you've already then invested the million, the 500, whatever the number may be. And I find I have a big problem with it ethically. Like, I find that really, really bad. And that's like you said, Ron, it's important to have those conversations up front. Here's the
Mm-hmm.
other thing, and I think that viewers that are customers should consider this as well. Sometimes competitors put in a low price to cause problems for all of the other partners that are realistic. So what they're doing is they're kind of poison pilling basically the the market or the landscape that you're dealing with. And you just have to remember those are realities that do come out in a lot of different implementations, because if they don't feel they're going to win it, well, let's put price pressure on the rest of the group, because then they're not going to be profitable, and then it impacts their business as well longer term. So there's some
Right.
interesting, I think it's, I guess, Ron, maybe just to kind of identify, it feels like it's less now in the software as a service market, because it used to be you'd spend $1 million in licensing up front. Now you don't typically do that. You pay over time, but it is something that I have seen in the past.
Yeah.
Marcus, I guess kind of curious now. So we go through that process, we get the selection, we reply to it. Where do you typically then get engaged? So you've got Ron kind of selling everything, getting everything set up in terms of the relationships and the conversation. Where does pre-sales typically get engaged? And is that typically like what we call a discovery process? Like what are those details?
Yeah, next would be a discovery process. So that would be, a conversation, hopefully with the prospect directly, some level of subject matter expert participation in that, where we would dig through the requirements a little bit more, understand what their organization does, how what do they do? Understanding the players, I think that's part of it. And then that would prep us for some sort of demonstration, which would be next. Yeah.
Okay. And then for that discovery, the importance there, obviously the subject matter experts. It sounds like the better that a customer can get their best that know the process in those conversations impacts the demo and then also ultimately the delivered solution. Is that a correct
Yeah.
assumption or statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having those subject matter experts is important in terms of helping identify scope. So if we're looking at a particular, requirement that's in the system, well, what does that really look like? And let's understand what that looks like. And then I think that helps us, again, either expand or contract the scope that we made assumptions on with, the request for information process or proposal process. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Again, I would say thinking process versus necessarily requirements is the key. I mean, I've gotten some discovery sessions and people say, we need this field, we need this field, this field. And you go, well, take a step back. You need to put a sales order. How are the sales orders coming in? Let's talk about the multiple channels that you've got. Let's talk about, do you have warehouse operations? What sort of a warehouse do you have? Are you going through a pick? Are you going through a pack process? I think understanding those types of requirements is more important than saying, well, I need to know, I don't know. There's a specific field I'm looking for on a sales order. I had a client one time or a prospect, they needed to print 3 copies of the sales order. They needed an orange one, and they need a yellow one, and they
On
needed a red
carbon
one.
paper, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Can you print 3 copies? And you go, well, why do you need 3 copies? Well, one has to go to the picker, and one has to. Okay, well, let's just take a step back. Do you want to use scanning? Well, yeah, they want to use scanning. I'm like, okay, well, then you don't need 3 copies. Do you need one printed at all? Let's, again, thinking about the process versus the specific requirements is really key in that discovery session.
And it's hard to get people to break away from that because their lives have been that, right? And
Oh yeah.
right, and maybe that's what's interesting here is that the question I was going to ask next is why in the heck do we have to do a discovery? We just paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for this selection consultant to sit down with our subject matter experts and document everything for you, Stone Ridge. Why do we have to have another conversation? What's your retort to that, Marcus?
It's a telephone game,
right?
Yeah, I want to hear it from the source. That it makes all the difference in the world to hear it from the source. And I appreciate what selection consultants do, and they can get to some level of detail, but it's a layer of translation, and to get a level deeper, I think is really key to understand what does this really mean. I think the other thing with selection firms is. Sometimes selection firms have a bunch of requirements, and I know prospective clients go through and check boxes, and I just know sometimes those boxes get checked when it's not really a requirement. And I think a classic one, at least in the SMB space, that small and medium sized space, is budgeting. Is budgeting a requirement? What do you actually do today for budgeting? Do you need a basic budgeting system? Do you need a full-blown budgeting system where you're budgeting FTEs and roles and benefits? Do you really want to roll out to 40 departmental managers a budgeting solution? Is that what you're asking for? Or and then you start digging into that, and they go, well, we really don't do budgets at all right now. Okay, well, we can get by with a much simpler system for that than the Cadillac, let's say, of a budgeting solution. So I think that's a classic example, but I think that sometimes a lot of those requirements end up in there, and you go, well, is it really a requirement, or is it a nice to have, or did a box just get checked? No.
Yeah, and doesn't that impacts the budget though too in terms of the software spend, right? Because I think that's the other thing, that we'll get a bunch of requirements. We'll say they're all needs, right? Because everything's a need all the time. It's not a want, it's a need. And then we'll go through the conversation, like you said, Marcus, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, the reality is that it's not a need. The reality is that it's a want. And a lot of the features that are being asked for in a new system may not even be in that RFI. Like an example would be with a lot of the Microsoft capabilities now, a lot of the AI enablement with the agents, for example, no one asks about it inside of an RFI or RFP because it's so new and groundbreaking that people are don't even know what to say about it. So when we show it, it's like, well, you're getting so much more value here than doing this one feature with three printouts you have to do. Like, isn't that better? So I think that rating, I think, becomes really important. I'm kind of curious off of that then, Marcus and Ron. I'm curious on your viewpoint with this too. But like when we go through that selection process, we align the discovery, we answer the questions, we have the interview, we have to demo at some point here. To me, it feels like it's easier to connect with the subject matter expert when they told you the reasoning around why, for example, they do that. So in demo, you can say, "Hey, here's how you do it. Here's how we do it," so to speak. Is that real? Does that happen for you, Marcus and Ron? Have
Oh,
you heard that? Yeah.
yeah, 100%. And I think
Yeah.
the other extreme is, or I shouldn't say the extreme. The other side of that is true too, where we're prepared to show functionality, and then you spend 20 minutes on it, and they go, well, that's nice, but that's not really important. So I think understanding what's important is really key in that selection process. I mean, I don't want to waste your time showing you something that you're not all that interested in. I want to make sure we're focused on what your real problems and needs are.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, and go ahead.
I was gonna say, the floor is yours, Ron. The floor is yours.
No, no, I echo exactly what Marcus was going to say. It is interesting. I mean, the RFPs I think are valuable for sure, and it's important because again, so many companies haven't documented anything. They don't really even understand where their inefficiencies are. They just know it's taken us way too long. So having that in there, seeing that structure helps us as we come in and start to do our process. The discovery for us, though, is we're looking at it through a different lens than someone else might be, okay? Because we're looking at it through the lens of a Microsoft F&O or Business Central solution, versus an Acumatica or a NetSuite solution or what have you. So it is critical for us to have that opportunity to engage the client more and really understand that and really be able to see for our own eyes whether or not we think that these people are going to be and the people that they're assigning to the project are also going to be strong enough, and available enough, more importantly, to uh, ensure that we're going to be able to deliver this solution because it's all about, we're going to put together estimates. We're not putting together fixed bids. We can't. I mean, it's not reasonable. So, but we also want to be able to give the client at least some peace of mind as to what we think this is going to come in at. And a lot of that is really predicated on how much they're going to be able to bring to the table as well. So having that additional discovery, meeting those users, those subject matter experts, or those, more importantly, some of those business process owners who are SMEs, but they're the ones that actually make the final call on the yes, that's what we want, that's the process we need, and that's the way it has to be. Those are really important to us as well. We can get most of that, a lot of that from the RFIs and the RFPs, but there's still those different nuances that we have to be able to vet and understand because again, it's just sometimes it's just those little things can have a cascading effect on the rest of the processes. So we really need to understand that from a Microsoft perspective for us versus a NetSuite perspective. And I think that's the importance. And that's the way I tell people when they say, we've already paid for this. It's like, I understand, and you've helped us. We're not going to have to do as much work,
Right.
but we still have to do our due diligence to ensure that we're going to be able to set this system up to support that functionality, those process requirements, and meet your objectives.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it just maybe to the viewers, it's a really common discovery. Like it have we had discoveries that are only an hour? Absolutely. More commonly, 4 hours on SMB, maybe a little bit less depending upon what's going on the enterprise side or mid-market, high-end mid-market. We typically do a 2-day discovery process, and that's usually around we do a meeting an hour for accounting, we do a meeting for inventory, we do a meeting for distribution, and they're usually about an hour. And what we've already done is we've gone through the processes that you've already identified in the RFI and RFP. We've kind of documented what we're going to be demoing as we go through that. And then now what
Mm-hmm.
we're doing is we're refining the why. And I think that to Marcus's point earlier, like it's really important to have those discussions and hear it really from straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, right? So it's a really important thing. I guess
Those
then,
1 hour discoveries, though, those typically are really more qualifying
yep,
discoveries. If it's a 1 hour discovery and it's only lasting an hour, it's most likely somebody that we're not going to engage
right.
because we've identified within that first hour they're not a good prospect. They're not going to be a good candidate for the software. And we have to be able to say, I think it's best that we just not pursue this one.
Right, which happens. We'll have an
Yes,
opportunity and
it
we'll just
does.
say, hey, we wish you the best and here, or we'll find another partner that we have
Yeah.
that we'll refer you to, right? So those are pretty common strategies that we use around that. I guess, when it comes to demo, how much time should a customer think about, Marcus, doing demos? Are we talking, is it an hour demo I should do? No demo? Should we do 4 hours? Like, where's the best you've seen as part of me? And maybe it's not time, right? Like, what is the best way to do those demos?
Well, for SMB, I think 2 hours is probably the minimum. If you're talking, finance stuff, that's probably it. Um, we don't do a lot of full day demos anymore with SMB. We do, but it's not real frequent. I think that 4 hour mark is probably pretty typical. I like it when people break those things apart. Think about your ability to sit and especially when we do so many of them online these days. Scheduling a 4 hour session and just assuming everybody's going to sit there for 4 hours, that gets hard on everybody. So I like them broken apart a little bit more. Allow subject matter experts to be in the sessions that they need to be. Get out of the sessions that they don't need to be. It helps with attention span. I think that's just a practical thing.
That makes sense. And
Yeah.
then when you're going
I,
through it, yeah, go ahead.
I love on-site demos.
Oh,
Every chance I get to actually, be on-site with a prospect, I think is very valuable. Again, you pick up on so many things that never make a requirements document. To actually walk a process or, to walk through a warehouse, you pick up on things that, you didn't ask and no one said anything about it.
well, I think the other advantage of being on site too is that oftentimes, two reasons. Number one, I always like to see their body language. Are they engaged? Are they hearing this? Do I see heads shaking? Do I see them
Or are
kind
they
of just
sleeping?
fixated on something else?
Yeah.
But the other thing is, and I will do this. I know some clients might not like it, but there's times where I've seen somebody, they'll kind of look at somebody else and not really, like they're not getting it. Okay.
Yep.
Well, then I'll ask the person that's doing the demo if they could hold on a second. I just want to make sure, and then I'll, go to that person. I want to make sure we're capturing what, do you have a question? Is there anything that you can, that's not kind of connecting? Well, I want to make sure that we're doing that. That gives us that opportunity to do that. If we're doing it over, video on Teams, you don't get that opportunity because so oftentimes people shut their camera off, but even then you still can't read them quite the same way.
Yep.
So it gives enormous value, like Marcus said, on being on site.
Yeah, my preference is always on site, like if at all possible. Obviously, there are some logistics issues that kind of cause, where you can't have it. So I think viewers should understand that you're going to have a combination of people that are on site and then also potentially remote as well.
Sure.
Because it's really rare to have one person that knows everything about the solution. So usually we're going to have multiple people involved in those conversations. So, yep, yep.
Yeah, totally agree.
Well, I know we're getting close on time here. We got 2 minutes left. I wanna leave it for, like, if you could give the viewers one thing that they should take away at the end of this conversation. It's always the fun one, right? What would you want them to take away on how to better engage basically with a partner like Stone Ridge and what the benefit would be of engaging in that way? Anything come to mind? Doesn't have to be deep, but what do you think?
Marcus, you
I
want to
would
go first?
Yeah, right?
Yeah, I would say just be willing to spend the time necessary to do this. It is going to take time. You can't shortcut the amount of time that this takes in terms of discovery, in terms of, as Ron had said, making sure you understand your requirements, what you need to do, spending the time with the demos. I think spending the time with the team. I think oftentimes people underestimate how much time it's going to take, and I would just say, be willing to spend the time, or make sure you understand it's going to take time.
Yeah, and I would say it's just transparency. Again, I go back to that. It's that you got to be able to communicate back and forth and really make sure that what we're going in with aligned expectations. I don't want to. I mean, you don't want to go through an entire demo evaluation and all these deep dives, and then spend all this time only to find out that the proposal we're going to put together is twice what your budget is. Okay. let's, you'll save yourself a lot of time. Let's just narrow it down. Let's get to understand what that might look like, what you're budgeting, whether or not it's realistic, and what are those, again, listen to your end users, make sure that they have a voice. And I think is another one of those I think is critically important.
Yeah, and I guess mine would be make sure that you really understand that your processes are going to change through this business system implementation and don't get stuck on the one or two users that say they absolutely need it. They may. I'm not saying that they don't need it, but I'm saying you really need, if a partner comes involved with any business system, shows you how the process works, and let's say it satisfies the process but it's different, and because, like, for example, now pick tickets are electronically delivered, like you've got to think through that vision in the future as well. So remember, as a partner, we show the process that we see being used fairly consistently based off of the industry, but at the same point it might be drastically than what you have in your industry right now because you're on an older system, right? So just be open really to those changes, and I think that that will help you. I see so many people scoring off of the requirements document, and it's like, well, that requirement is invalid now, but we're still getting scored off of it. So you really got to kind of think through that a little bit when you go through that process to maintain objectivity and to make the best decision on your solution. So with that, I think we're a minute over. Marcus, Ron, just a really big thank you for being able to be on here and give me your experience. I'm sure everyone is going to love this because obviously it helps people understand how to engage with us. And at
Yeah.
the same point, it's really good. I mean, I've known this for, like I said, 20 plus years now of being in here. A lot of these learnings are fairly consistent even from past time as well. So it's really cool to see.
So, and 30 years with
Right,
Marcus, and what,
right,
50
right.
for me then, I
50
guess, if
for
it's
you, I
100 years
guess, right? Yeah,
collectively. Is that
right,
what you're saying?
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
All right.
50, 30, 20. Come on, come on. All right.
All right. It was
With
fun.
Yep, absolutely. With that, everyone have a great rest of your week. We'll see you 2 weeks from now on the next Confab, which will be a lot of fun as well. So thank you everyone for your time.
Take care.
Bye.